Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about tribalism. What is that? Well, our brain is designed as people. We are a social creature. When we used to live in tribes, we had to live in tribes to keep ourselves safe. Of course, we had nomadic tribes and we had all kinds of different tribes, but tribes also have cultures. Tribes also have connections. Tribes also have blood connections. Tribes also have things that basically denominations that make them a tribe and rules that they have set for themselves that make them a tribe. And when another tribe comes along with their own set of rules, oftentimes there's conflict between them. The truth is, human history is utter boredom surrounded by war. That's because we are a tribal creature. So our brain plays a significant role in our cognitive, emotional, and social functions. And a very fascinating part of the brain is its inherent social nature. So we're wired to thrive in social context, seeks connections with other people, worrying about how we're seen. That's our ego. Neuroscientists have extensively studied this and identified a whole lot of neural mechanisms that underlie our social behavior. And so, what we want to think about is how tribalism connects with neuroscience. And it refers to humans forming social groups, identifying them driven by shared identity, values, goals, and the neuroscience of tribalism is also based on the natural mechanisms underlying our social behavior. And perceiving others as a part of our group activates our brain's reward system. It fosters loyalty and preference, but it also fosters the idea that these people understand me. These people reinforce my perspective. These people have my back. These people care about what I care about. These people make me feel righter than I may be. And that's what we are seeking because we as human beings find our home in the place where we are most accepted. And so if we feel accepted with the context of a church, that becomes our home. If we feel connected in a sense of our work, that's where we're home. If we feel a sense of acceptance in our home with our spouse, that's where we are home. Acceptance is a huge part of what makes a family work, but it's also what makes a tribe work because there's a lot of looking past your problems that you have to do to be a part of a tribe. But there's this also distinct desire to bring everybody to the tribal denominators of what the goals and the values and the identity is. And also, perceiving others as a part of our group activates the empathy circuit and it promotes compassion and cooperation. And what we have in the day and age that we live in, where tribalism is a big deal, especially now that it's all centered around politics and perspectives, you have the crazy globalists that want everybody to be the same, manufactured of the same values, no matter what the cost, no matter the fact that it turns lots of people into becoming a king over a bunch of peasants. They don't care about that. They just want to be right. The higher a person's intellect, the lower their common sense is. And so when you have a city full of highly intelligent people with no common sense, you have a bunch of people with theories that they want to prove to be correct, and they don't have to prove them to be correct. What they do is they hypothesize, they go into politics, and they decide to experiment on all the guinea pigs that are dumb enough to elect them. And we have a whole half of our country, the Democratic Party, that love people being guinea pigs. And they love to take advantage and become a bunch of kleptomaniacs with politics and steal every dime they can possibly steal from any human being that they can and take it to their own benefit and then act like everybody else is crazy for calling them out. The national findings highlight how our brains naturally seek social connections and contributes to tribalism. That social connectedness is a major component of what makes people aligned to each other because people want to know when all hell breaks loose, you have my back. And the brain's tribal nature stems from the importance of social behavior for human survival and evolution. And so our ancestors lived in small social groups, and they necessitated, if they wanted to stay alive, cooperation, loyalty, coordination, and the development of social skills like communication, empathy, and cooperation that favored by natural selection. So when the Vikings would go invade the Scottish and the Irish villages and the English villages and basically take over their lives, those people had to integrate suddenly to the Vikings' thought processes and operate to how they would live, and their leadership would become that, and their tribe would either survive or die based on converting to the new value systems. Research also, in much like the Democratic Party, when they put Biden up for president, they made us all into their warring tribe, and they forced us all, with COVID to submit to all their psychological warfare and their pathological craziness. Research demonstrates the significant impact of group identity and brain function. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is called fMRI, studies reveal that symbols associated with our groups, like team logos, political emblems, activated reward centers in the brain. If you look at a UCLA study, it observed increased activity in ventral striatum and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain where your logic comes from. That's your human being, associated with reward and value processing, because there's a reward system involved in following your tribe. And that reward is, as if you're in politics, we're going to give you as much money and steal as much money to make you elected. We're going to steal as many votes as we possibly can. If you're a Democrat, we're going to do everything criminal, non-criminal, whatever way possible, without any values whatsoever, to get you into that leadership. So we have the power, and you have to know that you need to do what we want you to do if you want to stay in power. That's why they all vote like a block. They don't think like human beings. They're just a bunch of surrogates of the crazies on the left who can't help themselves because they want more and more and more and more and more power. And then they get in office and they turn into multimillionaires and they love it. And then they create their little Somali government, their little Somali communities, and whatever else that they reward with. And that reward system, by being a part of the tribe, is a huge part of tribalism. Recognition memory, linking group identity to pleasurable and rewarding experiences, demonstrating their values, celebrating their values, celebrating all the habits and the things that they have formed as a tribe. They continue to reinforce over and over and over again. Aren't you proud to be one of us? We are such a good tribe. We are an incredible tribe. That's how tribalism works. It's a thing called groupthink. And if you want to be mentally retarded, one of the best ways to do it is submit to groupthink and never think for yourself and never have your own opinion, and just be dumb enough and lazy enough to subscribe to whatever the tribe says, and you'll be fine. That's why we have a bunch of morons in the Democratic Party who hate all human beings and hate what it is to be American, because we actually like to think that we think a little bit more independent, but they don't want that. They want a bunch of dogs in the pack who follow them, and they're just a bunch of uneducated idiots that just, go to college and believe that they know more than any other human being on the planet, but they don't, because they're idiots common sense wise. Empathy and social bonding. That's another thing that is very important, that your empathy is selective when you're in a tribe. That means that you only have empathy for the people within your own tribe. As a matter of fact, they'd rather everybody else be dead so that they don't have any problems. They, as a tribe, could just sit in their own crap and tell the world how it's going to be and carve reality out as they want it to be. That's how communism works, and that's how dumb people get in office and then take the rest of us and turn us into little calves and sheep that follow them. Brain regions associated with reward and social cognition, like the ventral striatum and the right inferior frontal gyrus, this suggests that our brains are wired to reward us for social behavior, reinforcing our tribal identity, because these areas of the brain are the part of our brain that call for us to be social, call for us to survive, call for us and teach us that we have to play a role in our tribe that is of value. Otherwise, we are not of value to the tribe. You always have to prove to a tribe how valuable you are. So Democrats will do that by stealing money, stealing votes, and they show their value by doing that. And then they get elected, and that's their value because they can bring their criminal element to the Democratic Party and they can all steal our country. A study found that when participants view the faces of individuals from their own racial group, the amygdala is less active when they view the faces of individuals from other racial groups. So that means that your emotions have an attachment to the color of the skin of different people. We have that because a different color of skin identifies a person of a different tribe. You may be of the same country, but you're of a different tribe. Our instincts, we have to overcome that. As human beings, we have to understand that the amygdala is a part of our brain that we have to evolve into not activating that instinct, which is to call a person of a different skin, of a different body posture, a different culture, of as a different tribe. They're not a different tribe if you live in a country like the United States. But then you have people who come to the United States to be a part of a country and they want to carry their own values into the country, integrate their own culture into the country, and change the entire country that they invade, like the Middle Eastern lovely people of the Islamic faith who want to convert everybody into Islam. And so they want us all to subscribe to that, but Islam actually believes in killing anybody that is not Islamic, at least the more radical version of Islam and the actual more traditional part of Islam. And of course, the Democrats love that too. Oxytocin has been extensively studied for its role in social behavior, particularly social bonding, group identity. And in response to positive social cues and touch, oxytocin has been linked to increased feelings of trust, cooperation, and empathy. And it makes it a real strong component of social bonding. And so, oxytocin can contribute to bias, leading to favoritism towards one's own group because it gives you dopamine and serotonin. It gives you a pleasure feeling when you follow your group. Because, once again, where we feel the most at home is where we feel the most accepted. That's why people love to go to their little political conventions in Chicago or wherever because they get to validate each other's perspective and they all feel wonderful and safe while they're there, and then they go off and act like lunatics and they do it while they're there too because they feel like they're with their family. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's adaptive capacity to influence by experiences and culture. Cultural neuroscience demonstrates the bidirectional relationship between the brain and culture. So with distinct neural activation patterns during your interactions with other people, among people from different cultures, the mechanisms in our brain behind tribalism and social behavior enables us to build inclusive societies that embrace diversity and foster empathy. And recognizing that malleability in our brain, the social brain, empowers us to strive for a more interconnected world. And it enriches our understanding of human cognition and behavior. So what happens is if you're going to integrate into a new tribe, you will suddenly become a lot nicer. You will suddenly become a lot more cooperative. Suddenly will have more compromise. You suddenly will disengage some of your emotions to once again feel safe and belong to the other tribe. And so we often will do that because we're adaptive people who want to survive. So if the Chinese take over the United States, which they're dying to do, and they may do that at some point because they have a long game to do that, we're all going to take on their communist structure and have all of our speech be changed, and basically all of our industries will be assimilated and we will become like the Borg in Star Trek, which is a lovely thing for some people because some people are so dumb they need to have somebody to tell them every single thing they should do because they're lazy, they don't want to work, and they want to live in mommy's basement and tell everybody how the world should be because they have no life and they have no brain and they have no desire to live, but they certainly want to tell everybody how to live. Our physical survival, our various tribal memberships bestow important benefits, like being able to buy ridiculous quantities of things, by being able to support each other and borrow things from each other, buy things from each other. You know, we have tribes of people that go to Costco. They're the Costco tribe. We have tribes of people that go to Sam's warehouse. Those are the Sam's tribes. Those are the Walmart tribes. You know, you have tribes everywhere, sub-tribes within tribes. And we have to understand that they also have a different value system. We have tribes within churches. We have tribes within schools. We have tribes within just about every single capacity of things that we operate as clubs. Our lives begin with the most intimate tribe, our family, whose job it is to protect and nurture us until adult life. But then gradually, over time, we get introduced to members of related tribes, our racial and ethnic groups, whom we share many of our most basic traits, including phenotypes, genetics, cultural histories. And then there are the tribes who we choose based on religion, politics, and places we live, and the schools we attend, the teams we root for, even the cars we drive. You know, the deal is that some people will put great strength in genetics, and you got to be look like me, you got to act like me, you have to have the culture's got to come from the place I come from, and that's only the people I'm going to relate to. Those are the only people I'm going to trust, and that's all I want to breed with. There's other people that will find that they want to get outside of their culture. They want to join another team. They don't like necessarily what they grow up in, and that's an important component for all of us to understand that we're very complex creatures. And we have to understand that we as human beings have to be understanding that that is a huge part of how we blend into life, is what tribes do you want to join. If you want to be less of a groupthink person, you have to stop thinking about tribes and you have to start thinking about rugged individualism. Ayn Rand, yes, Atlas Shrugged, one of the greatest books ever written, is called rugged individualism, and that is the study and the ability for a human being to make their own choices despite not belonging to the tribe, but knowing that the tribe needs what they have to offer. Take a moment and reflect on your strongest tribal affiliations. Do they involve demographic characteristics, family characteristics, race, ethnic groups, sex? Are they related to identifications like your gender? Now that we have all the gender Nazis out there who love to stuff their stupid genders down our throats with their politics and their anger, and there's a wonderful angry transvestite in almost every school district wanting to convert all our children, especially in the Pacific Northwest where I live in Seattle. They have one in every school. So, you know, the bottom line is we have to be aware that we are in a very tribal world. And if you are not a part of the Democratic tribe, they want us all to be assassinated. And that is the sad truth. 60% of them, if you don't agree with them, want you dead. That's how sickening this world has become in the democratic politics in the United States. And that's also a worldwide problem. All right, let's take a break. Look at what they're doing to the Jews. Taking a break, we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about tribalism. So come back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about tribalism. You know, some might believe that most wars are fought over religion. You know, a more contemporary understanding is that wars are always tribal, and an individual's religion is only one component of a whole lot of affiliations that lead people to indulge in tribalistic violence. You know, the current war in Ukraine, initiated over Russia's historical grievances and perceived NATO threats, not anything related to religion, is a daily reminder. Those that are fans of The Godfather, the Italian Mafia, or students of Italian Mafia history know that even when rivals are the same race, ethnicity, religion, even the as were the notorious five families of the Italian American mafia, tribalistic violence is a common outcome. And this version of tribalistic violence played out on the streets of New York for much of the 20th century and was perpetrated in the defense of honor, turf, and business interests, primarily business interests. Mafia violence through primitive means is at least related to the defense of family and resources. And so it was very personal. And on that level, it makes evolutionary sense. But when it comes to violence related to other chosen identifications like sports teams that we root for, the excuse of brutality is much more tenuous. Politics, crazy. And, look at the NFL. These dudes still fight. They sucker punch each other. They get in huge fights, and people love that because it's an example of a tribalistic battle. It's one of the few sports where you actually see almost everything: football, baseball, ice skating, violence, boxing. You see everything in hockey. It's one of the most wonderful combined sports that celebrates the human spirits and the human's desire for tribalism. Political tribalism is the most powerful and dangerous one. And especially when you have a bunch of advocates on one party. The Democratic Party is filled with advocates. They're not people that represent the people that they're elected to represent, because first of all, they steal most of the elections. But the second part of it is that they're not there for anybody's interest but their own. So they're advocates. So they're in that office to make money and to serve the benefit of the party, not the people they represent. And so they all vote like a bunch of robots for the same things. If the main robot says we must do this, they all do the same thing. So a Schumer or whatever the heck the leader is at any given time, they're all dumb. But they're all going to do their little Broadway production and tell everybody what they have to believe, and they all subscribe to that belief and vote that way. It's really sad. They don't care about the human beings. They don't care about who they represent. They don't care about the country. All they care about is themselves, their party. And those beliefs, they think, reflect our values. But they don't. They reflect their wallets. That's called lobbyists. Lobbyists support the Democratic Party. People that pay taxes support the Democratic Party because they've figured out how to steal money through the government. And they do it every day, all day long. Even with the Republicans in office, they find ways to make their little monies and be their little selves with their little cameras and their little stupidity that they do on the news every day, all day long. Our political beliefs are supposed to reflect our values. Our values reflect how we believe the world should work and to increase the prospects of our physical and psychological survival. And on this level, ardent political tribalism is understandable, but tribalism of all kinds lends itself to distortions exploited by intellectually dishonest people. There's a whole lot of platforms that influence them that have money. There's social media for popularity. And then violence is all too common consequence of tribalistic propaganda, especially when they call people in ICE who are trying to get criminal elements, illegal criminals, illegal people in our country, immigrants in our country who illegally cross our border, who rape, kill, do all kinds of drink and drive, do all kinds of crazy things just like other Americans do. But then they come in here and they do it, and they do not know our laws. They don't know our values. They don't care about anything but themselves. And they go out and they install hurt on children and people. And basically, Democrats want all that to be okay. They want all that to be okay. So ICE is out there trying to clean the clock of these people. And guess what they're doing? They call them Nazis. Aren't they, sweetheart? Aren't those smart? Those are such smart people. Those wonderful Democrats, they're just so smart. You have to understand, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. That comes from a French philosopher called Voltaire in the 18th century. This is nothing new, folks. I would add that there's no limit to atrocities everyday people can justify when they believe their cause is just, or that they are the disadvantaged underdogs in a conflict. Boy, if they want to label themselves the underdogs, they will play that card all day long. These people are narcissistic. They gaslight the hell out of people, especially children, especially people who are emotional, especially people who have mental illnesses like angry transvestites. This kind of stuff is crazy. Anybody that's got a gender, there's a thing in the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health, which will probably never be a diagnostic manual number 6 because number 5 is where it's at, and all the transvestites are on the board, and they do not want. There's half the board that wants gender identity to be changed, and the other half doesn't, because the transvestites want gender identity to not be in the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Health. However, currently and up to this date, gender identity has been in the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health, and it's in the current one, DSM-5, and it is a disorder. That means they are sick in the head, and they want to lead us? Come on, folks. Figure it out. If you don't know what gender you are, if you don't know if you have an ovary or not an ovary, you got a problem. The mind is objectifying people as part of the larger ends, justifies the means, rationalizations, which is unsure of tribe success. And when you're unsure of your tribe's success, the tribe is going to rally around to try to be successful because they think they are right. And people love to be right. They will get a divorce because they want to be right. They will never talk to their children because they need to be right. They will quit their job because they need to be right. That's how stupid people are. It's usually simple and efficient. Always sounds good when you free yourself from considering the collateral damage and long-term consequences of your actions. The willful blindness is the use of a bunch of defense mechanisms like denial, repression. Tribe members use this to mutually support and validate each other. Delusional thinking, denial, repression. These are all the common defense mechanisms that tribes have to use to stay within the means of their diatribes. Tribalism is commonly spotlighted for dangers and risks, but it also should be equally credited for the best human instincts. The tribal nature gives us superpowers of collective action and progressive innovation. Tribalism will push things forward because if the tribe needs something, then man will innovate. And that is a good thing because sometimes our technology evolves us into better people. Understanding how tribalism triggers thoughts and actions. Well, look at AI. This kind of artificial intelligence is taking over. We're eventually going to be hiring robots to work in businesses so they make money for us while we sit on our fat asses and play video games. Understanding that our thoughts and actions, if the tribe wants to be lazy, the tribe will create ways to be lazy and survive. And so people will form bonds, they'll steal change, and they'll accomplish greatness in their mind based on the laziness and the tribal needs. Tribal instincts made us human in the first place, and that's something we have to honor. You belong to a whole lot of tribes. The United States is a tribe. Your family is a tribe. The new economy is a tribe. Your political party is a tribe. Your work is a tribe. Your church is a tribe. Your non-church is a tribe. Tribes can be defined as a large social network bound together by shared ideas. And this is the original meaning of the Latin term tribe. So what's happened with social media is since people don't have to get off their fat asses and they can sit in front of a computer all day, they can find their tribe online. And there's a lot of lazy ass people with opinions that are online that love to find their tribes. And they do that all day long with their little TikToks and their Instagrams and their Facebooks and their X accounts and all their other crap out there. But it's a very dangerous thing because there's nobody fact checking these tribes. These tribes are forming their opinions and then they're forming their actions. And sometimes That's a very dangerous proposition when you have psychotic people coming from the Middle East and deciding to bring their Islamic faith into the world and to the United States and migrating it through their social networks. Group-oriented motivations like conformity, status seeking, nostalgia, for past generation, it used to be a fairly important thing. Because here was the deal. If you lived in a small community, and you've got some jerk that lives three houses down, but you don't have a lot of police, you don't have fire, you don't have hospitals, you don't have a whole lot of things, you're going to have to depend on your neighbors. And if you do that, you're going to have to look past a lot of things because there's going to be things about them that you don't like. Maybe they're having sex with their kids. Maybe they're doing heinous things. Maybe they steal from you. Maybe they do all kinds of things from you. Guess what? If your house starts to burn down, you may need that neighbor. Maybe if your tractor breaks down, you may need the tractor of the neighbor. So you can't afford to create enemies. And that's the problem with tribalism is that people are not always held accountable for their warped perspectives. People, whistle past the graveyard. Tribe and tribal shouldn't be dirty words, but they're a part of our nature. It's something that we have to consider as a part of us as human beings. What tribes do you belong to? If I'm going to hire this person and depend on them to represent me, I need to know what tribe they come from. So maybe you ought to go on their social media accounts and figure that out, see what they're affiliated with, see what their value systems are. But if you can't, you're going to have to accomplish that in an interview. And that's a very important thing. To be able to go into that part of your life and go into someone else's life and figure out what is their background. If you're going to date in this day and age, you probably need a background check. I'm talking about legal. You probably need a medical background check to find out what's going on, what disease they have in that, organ that you're interested in. And then you're going to probably have to understand what their financial background is. That's a good thing to do if you're going to be serious about somebody. They shouldn't want to hide it. They should be very open. You'd want to know if they've got $40,000 in debt. You'd probably want to know if they have venereal disease. You'd probably want to know, what kind of criminal background they have. In this day and age, with the way people hide, that is a very important component if you're going to date somebody. Seriously. Behavioral scientists used to debate nature versus nurture, but in the past decade, they've concluded that human nature is nurture. We're wired to encode patterns of communities that nurture us and then enact these patterns. Well, the problem is we are so safe in our societies that if you drop the average human being in the middle of the jungle, they'd probably be dead within a day or two because they wouldn't know how to survive. And that's true. And it's sad, but since we're such weak human beings, we learn well how to live in our societies and in our big old buildings and our dirty old houses and our grubby old, places that we, are nasty looking cars that nobody takes care of until they're going to sell it. The bottom line is that we as people nurture each other much more than we honor our nature. And what's important is we have to have a balance between nature and nurture. And we have to communicate. And that is the importance of communicating. Communicating your feelings, communicating your meanings, and then communicating your logic and being able to hear that from other people. If you're going to be a non-conformist, non-tribalist, you cannot live in your own vacuum. You have to be a good listener. This is a very important part of our life. It's a very important ingredient. If you're going to have to understand that, living in this world requires us very much so to understand that we have to hear each other. By doing that, we are able to differentiate. We are able to have opinions. We're able to individuate. We're understanding what parts of tribes that we want to be in and what parts of the tribes we don't want to be in. Temple building and other ritual collaborations long preceded architecture. Look at the Mormons. They got their little temple. Look at the Catholics. They've got their temples. They've got their little Vatican and all their little churches. Everybody's got their little things and they're built exactly in their certain ways. And their Methodist churches have their little components and the Lutherans have their components. temple building's been around. Go look at the Mayan community and the remnants of the Mayans. Go look at the Incas and you'll see that with them. Go look at the, Egyptians and all their, pyramids and crap like that. That's how people live. They build temples to themselves. They build temples to represent their cultures. There's also clan level cooperation. Hunts began with hundreds and thousands of years ago, but you had to be a part of a clan if you were going to hunt. You could be a part of a smaller clan, or you could be part of a clan that is combined with other clans. But the deal is, the clan means we're all doing the same thing, and if we're hunting, all of us are going to benefit from the hunt. And that was a very important part of hunting, is clans. Hunting in clans meant you had a better chance to be successful. The early cultural evolution of human groups shaped our genetic evolution because that's where you bred. These revelations inspired a new origin story for our species. It places tribes and tribal instincts at the center of the plot. So we have to understand that tribalism is a huge part of us as human beings, but it does not have to be a huge part of our intellect as human beings. There were three waves of group psychology that evolved in the Stone Ages. The pure instinct to imitate and mesh with the people around you, so that the tools that people formed, the things that people used to eat, all were created within the groups that were formed, and then they would pass on those skills to the other groups. The hero instinct to emulate the respected contributors in the community, because the heroes would become the breeders. So whoever was a hero was going to be the breeder, because you wanted to have more of those heroes. So, the desire for males was to become the hero within their community, which means that they were going to lead a tribe. If you lead a tribe, then you can dictate all the cultural values of that tribe, all the intellects, all the traditions, and all the other things. And so the desire to be the breeder, to be the one, to be the champion, to be the leader, you wanted to be that hero. And then there's this ancestral instinct to perpetuate the ways of prior generations. That means let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's do what our ancestors did. Let's learn from our ancestors. Well, that's a smart thing. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, but what you want to do is innovate the wheel and not just do what past generations did, but you want to take that and evolve it into something that helps the tribe currently and maybe evolves the thinking of the tribe currently. This is how we as creatures evolve. Once all these instincts are in place, the real magic of tribal living starts. Groups didn't need to reinvent the wheel each generation. Innovations that worked would get emulated and propagated. you know and the result is a cumulative cultural evolution. So cultures grew more prosperous, relevant over time. Individuals became more capable because they could access a legacy of shared knowledge. This was also a very important part of the medical component of every single community, that they needed to evolve their ability to heal. All right, we're going to take another break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. There's some systems that happen in tribalism, and they operate within the world of tribalism even today. The first thing is we sideways glance at classmates, coworkers, neighbors to learn what's normal in the groups. This happens when you're about 11 to 15, but this happens through the course of your life, is that you develop your individuality by looking around you at what other people value. And by doing that, if they dress a certain way, if they listen to certain music, if they talk a certain way, if they're smart in a different way, if they've got a new toy in a different way, all of these things, especially at a very young age, are a part of I'm going to borrow that. I'm going to borrow the dressing like that. I'm going to borrow being like that. I'm going to borrow talking like that. I'm going to borrow that kind of music that other person's listening to. And they do that to try to form, their individuality. Oh, is that something I'm going to integrate into who I am or not? And, if you're something like listening to Metallica in the 1980s, and all of a sudden other kids were listening to Metallica in the 80s because they were somewhat interested in it, or that it had a very strong emotional component to it, all of a sudden you would find them in 2025 listening to Metallica as a group, thinking that they are wonderfully affiliated with the Metallica tribe because some kid in school liked Metallica and everybody else tried it on, and just because they tried it on, they become part of that tribe. Doesn't mean they liked it, but it brings back old memories. It can limit our independent thinking, and that's a problem by looking sideways at everybody else. But it's why we can meld minds and mesh actions with an in-group members because we're so readily to belong to a group. We desire more than anything. Some people are see themselves because they choose to as outcasts or as outliers of groups. Some people live their whole life assuming that they're always outside the group. What they don't realize is they made the decision to be outside the group, and they have that insecurity that nobody will love me and nobody will accept me because they've decided to be the outsiders. But the problem is that takes a lot of energy, but some people just have to do that because they integrate. I'm an outsider, even in my marriage, even with my children, even with my church, even with my life, even with my school, even with my work. I'm always the outsider. You're not a victim. You decided to be that yourself. But the problem is that we're always side-eyeing everybody else to see how and when and where and to what degree we can fit in. Next time, next we also peek at the lives of people that are leaders, CEOs, MVPs, rock stars, politicians, and we yearn for their renown and often take on the quirks we observe. And that's why we follow these stupid actors that play roles that we think are wonderful, but they're written by somebody else. And just because they acted it doesn't mean that's who they are as a human being. But we, as stupid people, will follow these people like they're some deity. We are wanting to be influenced so badly that we will sit there and scroll for hours, 8 hours a day for some people, trying to find how I can evolve and how I can change based on what other people are doing. That's how social we are. We are always looking for influencers. We have this hero instinct. It's why, it's all, it's just amazing that what people eat, how people lose weight, how people wear their clothes, how people talk, how successful they are, how they make their money. We all do this. We all look at each other and we try to figure out things out by how we stare at each other. Independent thinking, an inventor, very rare component of any human being. There are probably 0.5% of our population on the planet Earth that are capable of inventing, and probably 0.01% of all those people actually do invent. There's a lot of very smart people in this world, geniuses that live in their mommy and daddy's basement, worthless as tits on a bun, because they never got off their ass and had any will to do anything with their life. So they sit around sucking the life out of everybody else with their intellect because that's how they figured it out. I'm smart enough to get money out of mom and dad. I'm smart enough to get it from my cousins. I'm smart enough to get it from other people. I'm smart enough to steal it from anybody I can. I'm smart to do that. Boy, and they use their intellect to steal. And they're lovely people, and hopefully when they're dead, they have a miserable life leading up to it because they deserve it. The ancestor instinct lingers in our backward-looking curiosity about past generations, our fascination with people, founders, histories, antiques, our ache to maintain traditions, our compulsion to carry forward tribal traditions is why some myths and rituals persist among centuries. We need comfort. Comfort happens in rituals, Christmas season, Thanksgiving, Halloween, New Year's Day. We have to have all these benchmarks because we all go, I know how to do that. I know how to do Christmas. I know how to do Thanksgiving. I know how to do Halloween. I know how to do New Year's. I know how to do the 4th of July. Lovely, lovely, lovely. We need all these benchmarks to make us feel accepted by other people and to make us feel comfortable because we like predictability. This is what makes people feel that they have common themes, that they believe that they're a part of something. People need to feel that. That's a part of our instinct, but sometimes they can overcompensate. Let's say you join the Democratic Party and decide it's okay to assassinate anybody you want, or sit around and cheer other people that assassinate anybody they want, like the Democrats love to do. They want everybody dead that doesn't believe in their crap. So the problem is that if you're going to overcompromise trying to be a part of the tribe, you probably got some mental illness there. You probably got a lack of will, and you probably are not the nicest person, and you probably have a very low value system, and you probably do not use your intellect in a way that is very productive. Our needs to belong, standing, continuity motivate us to engage with and enact patterns in our culture. And it's really important to try to focus if you want to be a part of a real culture that you're proud of, you want to practice a value system that takes into account respect for everyone, not just your ugly self. Cultures are manageable. We can cue cultures through tribal triggers. Cultural patterns of individuals and groups fluctuate from one setting to the next. And so the underlying reason is we want to have democracy because democracy means the majority can continue to dictate how the culture operates within their value systems. But then when you have people stealing elections like the Democrats, they're going to take the value system and warp it in their own selfish way without taking into account the majority. The underlying reason for this mutability and multiplicity is very simple. We pick up new cultural identities and codes with each new community that nurtures us. Religions, professions, vocations, avocations. It was such a popular thing for so many years to send our kids to Harvard or all these $150,000 a year stupid schools, Brown University, 70,000, because we thought they were getting a great education. But meanwhile, these crazies were hiring people all over the world with psychotic perspectives, teaching our children and guilt and shaming them into believing their own perspectives. And these professors, because they're fresh out of high school, fresh away from their home, would mold these minds into thinking that they're correct and all their warped perspectives are correct. And then they go out in the world and they join the Democratic Party and instigate trying to force it down everybody's throats. Situational triggers provide an important lever to managers who strive to summon identities and habits to help the endeavor. So it's really important that, people establish identities so that they feel safe. Like wearing, traditional uniforms in a school, street clothes that may trigger distracting and diverse identities, like rich, poor, or gang related stuff, can be a very dangerous thing. So what societies do is they create, an environment that forces kids to wear, let's say, certain kind of clothing. By doing that, making it simple, the kid has a uniform, and they don't have to show off their Cripper blood mentality. These cues can also make the environment a lot safer. So we have to understand that we can allow people to be who they are, but if they're going to establish who they are as an identity, they're going to have to do it through their character rather than what they wear. That's called intellect. The peer codes that carry cultural habits are triggered by tribe mates. The hero codes that carry ideals and ancestry codes that carry traditions in a response to specific experiences. So if you have a hero code, let's say you have a tribe that is under attack. Well, we fought a war for this 40 years ago, so all of a sudden we're going to fight another war now because that's what our heroes in our tribe did. So some people think that it's okay just to fall back on tradition and do what they've always done. No, that's not always a good idea. You have to think of the context of the time you live in, and is it good for us? Is it good for the tribe? Is it good for people? But loyalty is stupidity. People are loyal to gangs. If you're going to be loyal, you better figure out what you're loyal to, and you better figure out what the value system you're loyal to, because that may sink you to the bottom of the ocean if you're loyal to the wrong things. Loyalty, once again, is utter stupidity. Utter stupidity. However, loyalty can be a good thing to some degrees, but it can be a really bad thing if you sell your soul to loyalty. Evoking cultural strengths and loyalty requires rigging an environment with triggers, meaning that there is a cost to pay. If you vote differently on this issue, we will not fund your election. That's what the Democrats do to every Democrat that even dares to think outside their box. You know, politicians, coaches, CEOs know the cultural habits that surface in particular settings, cultural ideas that can be stroked by symbols and cultural traditions. And, you know, it's even ceremonies around these cultural celebrations. You know, tribal instincts correspond to a different mappings of a community. The peer instinct, the attention to what's prevalent, hero instinct, interest in what's prestigious. You know, let's say in a sports, if you have a basketball team and your basketball team cheats or is violent or harmful, and they kind of bend the rules, your whole team's going to do that. That's going to be the culture of where your high school is. I remember in Indiana, we had all kinds of high schools that cheated and were violent and horrible people. And then you got these young kids that were playing clean basketball. And all of a sudden they go up against some team out of, Gary, Indiana or some other place. And they would just come in and beat the hell out of them. And there was no way they were going to win the game because they were too beaten up to be able to win the game. You know, there's also ancestor instinct, curiosity to be about what's precedented. You know, there's kinds of social information that molds cultural codes. They're key to remolding these codes, changing the culture. Change makers want to shift cultural norms by creating prevalence of signals. For example, when Kodak wanted to promote amateur photography, it ran ads with Kodak people snapping photos on their travels. They gave away cameras to schools and clubs and launched magazines featuring snapshot contests where they would compare photos by different students. By making it appear prevalent, Kodak lured consumers into trying amateur photography and has set off a cycle of change practices that created a new norm, and all of a sudden everybody was buying cameras. Change makers also want to shift cultural ideas, and they do so through prestige signals. They change people's family planning behaviors. So when credit cards came out, guess what? The Diners Club was one of the first credit cards. Now all of a sudden you can go to that country club. Now all of a sudden you could go to that restaurant you could never afford. Now you can go on vacation to this exotic island in the Caribbean. And that used to be the thing. You can live like a millionaire because all you have to do is borrow money on your credit card, and then, oh yeah, my next paycheck, I might be able to pay that off over 12 months. And boy, people would do that left and right until they finally felt like their income was that of the credit card and what the credit card allowed rather than what they actually made. So people lived basically to pay off credit card debt, and they still do that to this day because they want to live as if they are entitled. There are countless people who have destroyed their credit who live off of credit card debt, who basically will pay their credit card down and then spend the credit card the amount of money that they paid off to buy new things. And they just live like that. They live to pay off their credit cards. That's a sad thing about our world because we want that prestige. Prestige is a big part of a reward system within a tribe. The competition between Democrats and Republicans has veered into dysfunctional conflict. Increasingly, the two-party system looks like a standoff between permanently polarized tribes. We don't need that as a government. We need individuals who support their communities. We need people who think on their own 2 feet, people who have opinions, people who listen to the people who vote them into office, but they don't vote them into office because they steal elections through mail-in ballots. I live in Washington. That's all we have, mail-in ballots, and we have a governor. Guess what? Stole the election. Yes, they do it all day long. Every day we have all these congressmen that steal elections. That's how they get in office. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that wonderful? They don't represent the people, they represent themselves. The deal is, that we have to come to grips with toxic tribalism. It is killing us, and we have to come to terms that we need to get away from tribalism and get into people thinking for themselves. Rugged individualism is what built this country. We need to get back to that value system. That's our show. I want to thank everybody for listening. I love hearing from you. You could do that on our webpage, voiceamericamedia.com, libsyn.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Remember, share discoveries and grow rather than institute tribal beliefs. Tribalism is a false beliefs that need to be reflected back to be true. That means you have to have somebody agree with you. Tribalism is the root of all wars. It is something that we have to diminish and get rid of the toxic components as fast as possible. Thanks for listening.